Hello and welcome to the Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Szamuely. With me today, of course, is co-founder of the Gaggle, Peter Lavelle. So, Peter, we're now so used to this strange discourse whereby the freedom of expression is identified with the suppression of freedom, where censorship is really an enhancement of freedom, where government repression is actually furthering democracy, that we barely notice, media outlets openly advocating the suppression of other media outlets and other viewpoints that they disagree with. It's just par for the course. We obviously saw that when Elon Musk took over Twitter and he said he was going to bring to an end the deplatforming, he was immediately attacked as a fascist, which is sort of strange. Is no, I'm going to bring back freedom of speech on Twitter. He was a fascist. That's that's kind of the way this discourse has developed, and so all of a sudden we're getting another flurry of stories about the dangers, the threat from Russia and Russia's invasion of the information space. Kind of amazing because, RT, as we know, it's kind of pretty much unavailable in Europe and the United States. But apparently the Kremlin's influence is greater now than it has ever been. And so I just want to show you this, just in the last few days, the flurry of stories in the mainstream media. So here is the New York Times, naturally, from a couple of days ago. It says, Russia pushes long-term influence operations at the US and Europe. So already long term. So that's already sounds pretty scary. A newly declassified American intelligence analysis says Russian spy agencies are using influence laundering techniques to hide the Kremlin's involvement in cultivating pro-Russia and anti-Ukraine messages. So automatically, we're kind of baffled, like, what's an influence laundering technique? I mean, and then to hide the Kremlin's involvement in cultivating. And then you ask, well, do you have evidence of the Kremlin's involvement in any of this? But as we find when we look through these stories, we never get anything. We never get examples of this influence laundering technique. We never get examples.
Never do.
Kremlin never do. That's the thing. Or the Russian disinformation operations, everything. Where are these examples of that? And they never, they just, all these stories are kind of essentially kind of self-enclosed, self-referential. So you kind of have to be in that world to accept that the Kremlin is everywhere. And so here we have Russia is intensifying its efforts to spread pro-Russia and anti-Ukraine messages in the United States and the West, using influence laundering techniques to hide the efforts of its intelligence agencies to manipulate public opinion, according to a newly declassified American intelligence analysis.
They provide the link.
Exactly. Where's the link? You never. This newly declassified is just provided to the media, but we never. Where is this analysis so we can actually see it? But no. There's no link, no evidence of this analysis. It says efforts by Russian intelligence agencies to shape public debate leading up to the 2016 election focused on methods designed to have short-term effects, like exacerbating tensions in the United States through social media posts.
Yeah, but hasn't that already been thoroughly investigated?
It has been, yes, it has.
Completely empty.
Exactly. It has been shown to be empty. They've never been able to link any of that to the to Trump's victory, to the election, or anything. I mean, but they're all repeated as if somehow it's all been established.
Well, I remember Senator Blumenthal was, give me names, names, and then I guess he even went out and to Silicon Valley and demanding like names, okay, yes, like McCarthy. Okay,
Yes,
and
that's
they
right.
couldn't provide them any names because there weren't any.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, that Blumenthal, Mark Warner. Yeah, yeah, all of them. But the newly declassified U.S. analysis looks at how Russian intelligence services, in particular the FSB, have been secretly using allies inside nominally independent organizations to spread propaganda and cultivate ties with rising leaders, efforts that are intended to play out over long periods of time. So again, you start scratching your head. They've been secretly using allies inside nominally independent organizations to spread propaganda. What does any of that mean?
What is a nominally independent
Yeah,
organization?
exactly. What is a nominally? You mean it's not independent, or it isn't, or it is independent? What does nominally independent mean?
Do you know the rising leaders, George? Maybe we're the rising.
Who are these rising leaders? And then the influence, and then again, to spread propaganda. Well, how do you know it's propaganda? I mean, how do you know that these people don't actually think the same thing? They just think, hey, this is pretty sensible. I mean, what they call propaganda or Kremlin influence operation, that somebody else says, yeah, New York Times just happens not to like those arguments, but they want to say, oh, this is just Kremlin propaganda.
Okay, well, also, George, if you look at, and these are basically like the Kiev Post and people like that, which are pro-Ukrainian government, but they do talk about corruption within the Zelensky regime. And so if you and I read the Kiev Post, according to Kiev Post, are we disseminating Russian propaganda? Because we don't use Russian media. We use other media. Okay. Right. The point is that if somebody says something outside of what is nominally blessed, then it's called propaganda. It's a very Manichaean kind of silly approach.
That's right.
So, for example, when we talk about the Minsk agreement, that's propaganda. That's talking point.
Yeah, okay, that's exactly, a Kremlin talking point. The influence operations are focused on developing a network of young leaders who the Kremlin hopes will support Russia or spread pro-Russia messages in their home countries. Efforts not unlike the Soviet Union spy agencies work to develop ideological allies and informants around the world. So you bring up, good to bring up the Soviet Union spy agency. But again, who are these young leaders? I mean, like, who the Kremlin hopes will support. But again, if the Kremlin hopes this, it doesn't sound like they're spreading Kremlin propaganda. It just sounds like, they look like people who are not unsympathetic to the Kremlin's position. But if that's what they hope, and there's no money being exchanged here, then these are people, these young leaders whose views you don't like. So
yeah, but it gets down to something as simple as this, everyone. What is the strategic aim and goal of NATO's proxy war against Ukraine? That's a seditious question, George.
Well, that is
a seditious question. Okay.
Yeah.
Because you're not allowed to frame it outside of the narrative that we're fighting for Ukraine's democracy, which doesn't exist. Okay. The propaganda for them is if you don't use the same paradigm. And there's plenty of young leaders out there that have been lied to about everything under the sun. Okay.
Well, that's it, exactly. But you see, then you ask, well, who are they talking about, these young leaders? To be honest, it sounds like they're referring to young Republicans. I mean, because I don't know who else are these young leaders who the Kremlin hopes will support Russia or spread pro-Russia messages. Because the only people that they might be referring to, because they're leaving it so vague, maybe young Republican congressmen, young firebrands. But again, they're not particularly pro-Russian. In fact, they're not pro-Russian at all. I mean, they just don't. I mean, they're just against this war. I mean, for the New York Times, that's the same thing. But it makes a difference. They are not pro-Kremlin, pro-Moscow. Somebody like Marjorie Taylor Greene, she hates the Russians. She just doesn't want to spend any more money on Ukraine. But for the New York Times, I mean, if you don't want to spend any money on Ukraine, that means you're spreading Kremlin propaganda.
Well, let's take another well-known organization, Code Pink. Okay, they are stridently critics of this war, but they're very, very critical of Russia as well.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah, exactly.
Because they present a very nuanced, complex presentation, right. But even that is sedition.
That's right, exactly. That's right. It says a U.S. official who spoke on the condition of anonymity to discuss the newly released material. Well, if it's been released and we can't see it, why is he speaking on condition of anonymity? I don't understand. I mean, if it's out there, it's been published. I mean, it's declassified. Why is he hiding behind anonymity? Described a group of so-called co-optees who claim to be acting independently, but in fact have been used by Russian intelligence agents to conduct influence operations against the United States. Again, this is a head scratcher. They claim to be acting independently. So do you have evidence that they're not, that they're being coerced? I mean, if you say they're not acting, if they're being coerced, how are they being coerced? Are they being paid to say? I mean, what's the coercion? I mean, I mean, they are. If they happen to agree with the Kremlin, they are still acting independently. You can't claim. Well, they claim to be acting independently. Well, they are acting independently, unless you have some demonstration that they're being coerced by the Kremlin.
Are they talking about the gray zone here?
Again, you know, it would be nice if I gave some examples.
I mean, but the New York Times and the establishment, they hate the gray zone. Yes. So why don't you just put it in the article?
Yeah, yeah. Well, of course, because I can't. Because if they suggested that the gray zone is working for the Kremlin, then, you know, they may well have a lawsuit on their hands because the gray zone is not working for the Kremlin.
That's exactly right. And that's why we do full circle. That's why they won't say it, because then you'll have to go to court and have discovery. Where's your proof? Right. And they don't have any.
Exactly. These operations include programs designed to build support for Russia among Americans and Europeans, along with blunter efforts like fake grassroots protests. So, and then they say the newly
what protests?
I don't know exactly what protests.
I don't see anti-Russian protests. I don't see pro-Ukrainian protests.
No, the newly released material focuses on 4 Russians who have worked with Russian intelligence, including Natalia Burlinova, who was named in the Justice Department indictment that was unsealed this year. So I looked this up, this Natalia Burlinova, and here it is. She's wanted by the FBI. She looks very dangerous to me, you know, like one of those, you know, she's the sort of the new Maria Butina, Natalia Burlinova. Date of birth, July 22, 1983. Hair brown, sex female, nationality Russian. Eyes blue-gray.
Stone cold killer.
A stone cold, exactly. So this is the arrest warrant. Natalia Burlinova is wanted for allegedly acting as an illegal agent of a foreign government, Russia, within the United States. Burlinova allegedly conspired with an officer of Russia's Federal Security Service to recruit United States citizens to travel to Moscow to participate in a program called Meeting Russia, run by the organization that she led. Public Initiative Creative Diplomacy, the FSB officer allegedly provided Burlinova with funding and other support for her recruitment efforts. Recruitment, they got invited to a conference in Moscow. I mean, they weren't recruited to anything. They, that's what they just went to a conference.
They had to sign a document in their own blood, George.
Yes. In return, Burlinova provided the FSB officer with information about recruited United States citizens, including their resumes, passport information, photographs, and analysis of their views towards Russia. Well, she had to do that in order to get visas for these people. I mean, it's like, yeah,
Well, I mean,
their passports and their views on Russia. Yeah, she had to apply for a visa for all these people to come to Russia.
so inviting someone to a foreign country is equal to recruiting them.
Yes,
This is logic.
That's the logic.
Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know that.
I did not know that. And so then, if you look at the so should be considered an escapist. Then
Yes.
I looked at the indictment. It says probable cause without ever notifying the Attorney General of her activities as required by law. Burlinova conspired with the FSB officer in a years-long effort to influence the opinions of future leaders in the United States on behalf of the Russian government. I didn't know that trying to influence people's opinions is that a crime? I mean, I mean,
well, this is, Jehovah's Witnesses knock on your door from time to time. Okay, they're trying to convince,
and nobody can get rid of them. Yeah.
Well, I mean, people canvass people all the time, finding out what their views are. I don't see how this is dangerous or malignant in any way. I mean, not yet. Maybe we'll go further.
Yeah, well, exactly. We'll continue with this dangerous bill of attainder. Burlinova recruited U.S. citizens from academic and research institutions to travel to Russia for this organization's Meeting in Russia program, which was devoted to Russian national interests and funded in part by the FSB. How do they know that? But anyway, all right.
Oh yeah, the FSB, they're an open book, George. I mean, they they show their ledger, on a quarterly basis. Okay, that's a perfect example of someone make a claim that is impossible to confirm. It's impossible to do that.
That's right, exactly. And I said in part, they had to sort of hedge their bets in part by the FSB. And then Burlinova provided extensive information to the FSB about the U.S. citizen participants in the Meeting Russia programs, including biographical information, their interests, and their political opinion. Well, they wouldn't have been invited to this conference if there wasn't some information about who they were and so on. Chances are they probably made a hash of it and invited all sorts of people who were not particularly sympathetic to Russia, but they needed, they had a program, and they started looking around and invited people. The FSB subsequently monitored the career developments of these U.S. citizen participants with an aim that some would become influential public figures. Most countries have these kinds of programs funded by their government, such as, Germany, like you have the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, which is run by the CDU. You have the Friedrich Ebert Foundation, run by the German Social Democrats. And what they do is they invite journalists, academics, whatever, to come to Germany, meet some German politicians or some German academics with a view that when they go back, they'll write some favorable stories about these German Social Democratic Party or the German Christian Democratic Party, and doubtless they'll keep track of you, make to see whether you are. It was a good investment to have you over in Germany and being wined and dined and taken here and taken there, one part of Germany and another. That's this is standard practice in most countries.
But Israel never does this.
No, Israel never does it. Yeah. I mean,
Israel, they'll take the entire both houses of Congress over for a junket. Okay, I mean, what is the difference here? What is the difference?
No, exactly. That's what she's doing. And it's clear they're not even pretending that she's doing anything else. I mean, they're trying to make it very sinister, but what they've got is she was organizing conferences and she was bringing over people that she thought would be sympathetic to Russia. As this story unfolds in New York Times story, it's clear that she did invite people who weren't particularly sympathetic to Russia. I mean, as per usual, kind of didn't make a very good selection. But that's what she did. I mean, she's not, but just because they keep saying FSB, FSB, she didn't work for the FSB. She's just running this organization. Rather like Butina. I mean, they try to make Butina into a kind of some sort of a Russian agent. As early as February 2015, Burlinova shared with the FSB officer her desire to attend conferences in the United States in order to advocate for Russian interests. On February the 18th, what?
Is it illegal to advocate awareness of a foreign country? Okay.
Yes. On February the 18th, 2015, the FSB officer informed Burlinova that from his position, he could help send her to the United States. The FSB officer specified that Burlinova would need to propose a list of American. It's pretty hard again to know how do they know all this. I mean, I'm sure the FSB officer didn't talk to them. Burlinova didn't talk to them. So where are they getting this information about this? That he did this, he sent her. He said, go to this thing. The FSB officer specified that Burlinova would need to propose a list of American experts and specialists with whom Burlinova intended to meet during her travel. The FSB officer also instructed Burlinova that her proposal for travel to the United States should specify that the purpose of the travel would be for Burlinova to establish and develop relationships with American experts, policymakers, and journalists and activists. I specify to whom? I mean, to the Russian government, to the American government. So that's not clear. The FSB officer told Burlinova that it would be easy to get funding for her travel if she were to plan to contact American experts with specific ties to information platforms. In other words, they have access to the media, like information. Sounds good. Information platforms. They have access. They get to the media. So on March the 7th, 2015, the FSB officer provided Burlinova with a list of individuals associated with the U.S. universities and foreign policy institutes. The FSB officer instructed Burlinova to study the publications and the activities of the people on his list so that he and Burlinova could discuss the possibility of Burlinova reaching out to them. Imagine they're putting all this down. This is this indictment. You think, whoa, yeah. Can we get to the criminal part? I mean, where what crime has she committed here? This all sounds like this is what normally happens. You're trying to reach out to whatever academic journalists and so on, whom you might then invite for a conference in Russia. On April 3rd, 2015, the FSB officer referred Burlinova to prominent scholars at U.S. universities, noting that they were influential, well-known, and could recommend students to study in Russia. Well, how hard is that? I mean, you could do a Google search, and you can find half a dozen American kind of academics, and who say, well, they look like, I mean, you can go look at John Mearsheimer. Mearsheimer probably has a number of students who, that they can be packed off to study in Russia. I mean, and there are a number of others. Stephen Cohen, the late Stephen Cohen, was still alive then. No doubt he also had a number of students who could all be sent to study in Russia.
Yeah, but it seems to me that the people that this affidavit claims that this woman was trying to target, well, these people would already have their own contacts in Russia. They would, I mean, if they would be positively predisposed already, they don't need this intermediary. I just don't understand it. I mean, if these people were willing to go to, why would they go to Russia? And plus, on top of this, in this environment, I find this really quite hard to believe. Okay, this is not like 1993.
Right, I agree. And then on January 8th, 2017, Burlinova asked the FSB officer for assistance obtaining visas for the participants in the upcoming 2017 Meeting Russia program. And then also in January 2017, Burlinova and the FSB officer evaluated the resumes of potential participants in the upcoming program to identify interesting candidates.
By the way, I've never heard of this program before.
All right. Yeah. The 2017 meeting Russia program was held in Moscow, February the 16th to 18, 2017. The U.S. citizens traveled to Russia to participate in the program. During the program, the participants visited the Russian Ministry of Defense, Ministry of State, Ministry of Foreign Affairs. One participant was asked and agreed to participate in an interview for Russian news stations regarding her participation in the Meeting Russia program. One speaker at the event was a former accused Russian intelligence agent who had operated in the United States until 2010, when the speaker was arrested in the United States and later released as part of a prisoner exchange between United States and Russia. So he sounds like somebody who was already in Russia. I mean, if this was some kind of a prisoner exchange, he was imprisoned in the United States, and is now so. But anyway,
what does that have to? I mean, is there a direct connection between that person and this woman?
I don't get the. This seems to be a separate issue.
She didn't find him.
Yeah, I mean, if you have it says one participant was asked and agreed to participate in an interview for a Russian news station regarding her participation in the program. That sounds like an American whatever participant, student or whatever. And then one speaker at the event. So this is something, he was just a speaker at the event, was obviously someone who had been in prison in America and had been exchanged in some kind of a prisoner exchange program. But that is something very different. He's just a speaker at the event. It's not because they together from the student, this American student who gave an interview, and then we have one speaker at the event was a former accused Russian intelligence agent.
Well, it looks like one person who broke the law was exchanged, and this woman has nothing to do with either. So
yeah, exactly. But we don't even know, because this person is an accused Russian intelligence agent. So, it's basically, when both sides arrest a whole bunch of people in order to facilitate an exchange. So we don't know. Doesn't sound like this person was convicted of anything. He was just in prison and then was released as a part of this program. Conclusion. For the reasons stated therein, there is probable cause to believe that Burlinova conspired with one or more persons to violate blah, 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 and acted in the United States as an agent of a foreign government without providing prior notification to the Attorney General as required by law. So basically, it's the foreign agent.
Just like Hunter Biden
Exactly.
did.
That's exactly what I was thinking. Just like Hunter Biden. Yeah, it was basically doing all sorts of things for a foreign government. But of course, it's much less despicable than in the case of Hunter Biden, because Hunter Biden is, after all, an American citizen who was working on behalf of a foreign government, whereas Burlinova is a Russian. I mean, if she's working for Russian government, well, that's what you're supposed to do. But that's different from working for a foreign government. Anyway,
this is flimsy. It's so flimsy.
Very, very flimsy. And then it says, the indictment said Ms. Burlinova had conspired with the FSB, blah, blah. The organization bills itself as a public diplomacy program for aspiring leaders to facilitate dialogue with Russia. The declassified intelligence analysis said the FSB had helped fund creative diplomacy, that it was grooming campaign that Russian intelligence operatives used to build up a network of future Western influencers who the FSB hoped would develop into Kremlin supporters, and so the FSB is tracked. But again, you see, what's going on here? Well, kind of what most governments do, they try to influence opinion about them in other countries. I mean, the British Council has done that for decades for the British government. I mean, that's standard practice. There's nothing. You're trying to make this sound sinister and say, well, yeah, that's
Goethe Institute in Germany.
The Goethe Institute, exactly. I mean, that's what you're supposed to do. You advance German culture, the Institut Français. You advance French culture. Yeah, that's par for the course. I mean, they're trying to make this.
The National Endowment for Democracy doesn't shower money on
democracy, of course, exactly. And National Endowment for Democracy is, of course, far more sinister, because they actually get themselves involved in political movements in other countries. They facilitate political organizations in other countries. There's no evidence that she did anything other than set up conferences. It's a freebie. I mean, these were just junkets. Hey, you want a free trip to Russia? Yeah, why not? And then the declassified analysis singles out three others: Andrei Stepanenko, who worked from the 2014-2019, Maxim Grigoriev. Now, watch for this one. I mean, we'll come back to this guy, Maxim Grigoriev, director of the Foundation for the Study of Democracy, an organization U.S. analysts says has spread anti-Ukrainian narratives on behalf of the Kremlin. And then Anton Tsvetkov, head of a group called Officers of Russia. And so here, CNN, boom, next day CNN runs with the story. Newly declassified US intel claims Russia is laundering propaganda through unwitting Westerners. This is the useful idiots of the Kremlin, unwitting Westerners.
Such an echo of the late 30s, early 40s.
Yes. And it says, well, a Russian intelligence operating systematic program to launder pro-Kremlin propaganda through private relationship between Russian operatives and unwitting US and Western targets, according to this newly declassified US intelligence. The US intelligence agencies believe that the FSB is attempting to influence public policy and public opinion in the West by directing Russian civilians to build relationships with influential US and Western individuals and then disseminate narratives that support Kremlin objectives, obscuring the FSB's role through layers of ostensibly independent actors. So again, layer upon layer of verbiage, and you say, okay, the Russians and there are Americans or whatever, and they meet and they talk, and sometimes these Americans may be persuaded to say things that are not in accord with New York Times, CNN dicta.
So this is kind of the Russian version of the National Institute of Democracy light,
right,
without the political. I mean, look, if you go to Washington, D.C., every third person you see is a peddler for a foreign country's influence. Right. Okay, that's the way it works. Okay, it seems rather benign what this woman was doing. You want a free trip to Russia? Take you around town and whatever. I mean, I don't see the harm in that. Okay,
not at all. There is
when
no
the
harm.
Russians do. Only when the Russians do.
Exactly. Exactly. There is no harm in that. She wasn't lobbying on behalf of the Russian government. I mean, what she wanted was, hey, that there be more people in the United States who would take a less jaundiced view of Russia. That seems like that's what she was doing. There's nothing else. I mean, there's no evidence here that she was doing any kind of lobbying or anything other than she was organizing conferences that they can come over, talk to people, and come away, it is to be hoped, with a less unfavorable view of Russia. I hard to see what's terrible about that.
Was she handing out envelopes full of cash, George?
No, that's it. That's the point. There was nothing. There was no cash. It's a freebie. It's just it's a junket. And then it says, these influence operations. This is a U.S. official authorized to discuss the material, told CNN, anonymous. These influence operations are designed to be deliberately small scale, the overall goal being US and Western persons presenting these ideas seemingly organic. Well, it is organic. I mean, if they're just simply saying what they believe, then that's what's inorganic about it? The co-optee influence operations are built primarily on personal relationships. They build trust with them, and then they can leverage that to covertly push the FSB's agenda. But again, you're not pushing any agenda. I mean, again, people, these are presumably the ones who get invited to Moscow. if they're, they're academics, researchers, or whatever, they're not stupid people. So they have, they can think for themselves. And so, they're not going to be pushing an FSB agenda or any agenda. I mean, they just come to conclusions that you may not like.
Was there any evidence that it's working? Is there any evidence that it's working? That these people...
Well, you never ask that question. Is it working? Yes. The campaigns have sometimes been effective at planting Russian narratives in the Western press, according to
an alternative interpretation.
Exactly, Russian narratives. And then says Maxim Grigoriev. So this is the guy that they came up with, as Grigoriev, and he who heads a Russian NGO, made multiple speeches to the UN presenting a false study. False. The moment you see this word false, okay, that means it's a true study. If you're already dismissing it as false, that claimed the humanitarian group, the Western Helmets, that's already a false characterization, humanitarian group, which operates in Syria, was running a black market for human organs and had faked chemical attacks by Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, with whom Russia is aligned. The fake chemical attacks, I mean, that's all over on YouTube. I mean, everyone has seen those faked attacks. I mean, there's no mystery about this. This isn't Kremlin.
It's been debunked. It's been debunked, George.
It's been debunked. And then it says, these claims eventually found their way into a television report on the far-right OAN in the United States, according to open source materials provided by the official. So they put this there. This is a link. And I looked at this link, and the link is to a story in the Daily Beast from 2019, which again is surprising. We're writing in late August 2023, and we're making it, we're going back to May 2019. So this is the best you've got, 4.5 years ago, a story that has already been covered in the Daily Beast.
Who's laundering misinformation, George?
That's right. Trump's new favorite network embraces Russian propaganda. And then what? The author is Kevin Poulsen. And people don't remember Kevin Poulsen. Poulsen was the guy who was kind of instrumental in the in the disclosure that Bradley Manning was the source of Bradley Manning was the one who disclosed the WikiLeaks. Well, he provided WikiLeaks with this information. So, for instance, the famous video of the shooting of the Reuters reporters, that it was Bradley Manning who had provided this to WikiLeaks. Of course, Manning himself had not confessed this. Obviously, WikiLeaks had not said this, but Manning had been involved in some exchange with a friend of his, I think Adrian Lima. And somehow Adrian Lima and Kevin Poulsen, worked something out. But either way, it was Kevin Poulsen who was involved in the disclosure that was of Manning. So anyway, here's Kevin Poulsen with writing this, and it says the White Helmets are a humanitarian group whose rescue workers are credited with saving at least 100,000 civilians caught in the crossfire of Syria's bloody civil war. Now, that's not propaganda. That's straight reporting. That's factual reporting.
This is, of course, according to the White Helmets.
Exactly, yes. Until recently, the group was partly funded by the U.S. State Department. Oh, well, then that makes it very trustworthy. Oh, it was funded by the state until recently. I mean, yeah, right. Until still, these are all funded by Western governments. So, MI6 was really behind it. Was the founding, the founding group behind the White Helmets. And then it's routinely praised as heroic by Western world leaders. Yeah, you would think might be you think about a journalist who thinks skeptically. Well, if Western leaders are praising it routinely as heroic, maybe they're not. I mean, so, and then a 2016 Netflix documentary on the White Helmets won an Oscar for its British producer. Whoa. An Oscar. So Hollywood embraced the white helmets. That's pretty impressive. Right, this is the link. This is the link into the CNN to show that there's this Maxim Grigoriev is some sinister character in making these allegations about the white helmets. This cable news smear traces directly to a frenzied disinformation campaign by Russia aimed at linking the white helmets to a broad range of wrongdoing, black marketing human organs, colluding with terrorists, and faking Assad's chemical weapons attacks, all of which have actually been corroborated. Gray Zone has done it.
Very well documented. Okay.
Exactly. Moscow has been relentless in pushing these claims tirelessly, falsifying videos and photographs, creating phony news outlets and fake think tanks to do so. Just pile it on,
Well, I mean, if there was ever an example of just outright gross projection, tirelessly falsifying videos, yeah, right.
Right.
If you want to tirelessly falsify a video, contact your local white helmets. Okay,
exactly.
They know.
Exactly. So here, then we go back to the CNN story. The officials stressed that the Western voices that eventually became mouthpieces for Russian propaganda were almost certainly unaware of the role they were playing, and including being unaware that they were mouthpieces of anybody. At the end of the day, this unwitting target is disseminating Russian influence operation, Russian propaganda to their public. Ultimately, a lot of these are unwitting people. They remain unaware who is essentially seeding these narratives. Again, no attempt is made here to refute anything. You're just simply Kremlin, Putin, false disinformation, propaganda. You just pile on this verbiage, but you haven't challenged any of the claims. I mean, the claims about the white helmets were very well documented. You haven't challenged any of those claims. You're just saying it's all propaganda. And then the intelligence provides several examples of Russian civilian co-optees doing the bidding of the FSB. And then again, they talk about this Burlinova. And then what's interesting here, which the New York Times didn't run, it says, in 2018, she visited, had meetings and hosted events at multiple US think tanks and universities, and then a work that was funded by the FSB, according to the intelligence. Burlinova, in an email to CNN, denied that her US trips to 2018 were financed by the FSB. All travel expenses were financed by a grant that we previously received from the Presidential Grants Fund, the main grant operator of Russia, she said. The FSB of Russia did not give me any money for the trip. Now, you cannot believe her, but where's your evidence to say that, no, she's lying and the FSB did fund this trip? They don't have any evidence. They don't have any evidence. They just say, well, this is the FSB. But I mean, as we discussed earlier, what's it based on? She says it wasn't. So
did CNN
refute her.
Did they make any effort to discover what the Presidential Grants Fund is?
No, yeah. The official declined to offer specifics to back up the intelligence community's assertions that the FSB is funding this kind of operation. Oh, that's a shame. I was hoping that he'd come up with some evidence. But notice
so this whole article is pointless based on that sentence fragment.
Exactly. George. Absolutely. But at least CNN put that in. New York Times didn't. But noted that once officials were able to establish FSB backing, it is easy to trace the narratives they are pushing in open source materials. Do you understand what that means?
Oh, sorry.
No, I don't.
No, because okay, you and I are an example. The Gray Zone is example. Jimmy Dore is an example. They look at the official narrative coming out of Western governments, out of NATO governments, and they say it doesn't make any sense.
Right.
That's Russian propaganda in their mind.
Right. Yeah. No, that's exactly it. It is easy to trace the narratives they are pushing in open source materials. So it sounds like what they're saying is that we are going to say they're getting funding from the FSB. And then once we've made that claim, we can make the next step that anything they say is obviously directly funded by the FSB, and therefore they're acting as mouthpieces of the FSB. I mean, that's what it sounds like. We're just going to make this assertion, it's the FSB, and then we go to take the next step and say everything they say is just FSB propaganda. And says, and now here we have the Washington Post, which wrote this story, and it's based on this report that's been prepared by this organization, which is funded by Pierre Omidyar, who's supposedly a magazine publisher. In other words, he's supposed to be some kind of a journalist. The thrust of this report is that social media companies are not doing enough to censor. They're not doing enough to eliminate Russian propaganda from their platforms. Again, it's very strange for a media publisher to be engaged in advocating censorship, but that's that's where. So it says Musk's new Twitter policies helped spread Russian propaganda. So now Musk, who only took over Twitter, relatively recently, already, because he said no more censorship, he's helping to spread Russian propaganda. EU says X's failure to slow the spread of disinformation on the internet would have violated EU social media law had it been in effect. So this is the
more censorship, more censorship, more censorship.
And again, as per usual, when you read the Washington Post, they're on board. Yeah, this is absolutely right. We need EU digital laws. We need absolute control of social media platforms. Yeah, exactly. No, not one hint of protest from a media outlet. Hey, I don't think it's a good idea, to start censoring other media. But so it goes on. Elon Musk's X, formerly Twitter, has played a major role in allowing Russian propaganda about Ukraine to reach more people than before the war began. So that's really, according to a study released this week by the European Commission, the governing body of the European Union. The research found that despite voluntary commitments to take action against Russian propaganda by the largest social media companies, including Meta, Russian disinformation against Ukraine thrived. So not only is it bad enough that Meta, the rest, take these voluntary steps to curtail free speech, and again, they're just simply saying Russian propaganda. They're not even saying, hey, these are agencies of the Russian government pretending to be real people or something like that. They're just saying we don't like this. We don't like this message. We're going to just take it away. But Russian disinformation has thrived. And here's the Washington Post saying, yeah, you're right. It's good. You're not doing enough removal of disagreeable content. Allowing the disinformation and hate speech to spread without limits would have violated the Digital Services Act. This is the new EU social media law, had it been enforced last year. So the year-long commission study concluded. And then the EU has taken a far more aggressive regulatory approach to government-backed disinformation than the United States has. The Digital Services Act, which went into effect on August the 25th, requires them to assess the risk of false information, stop the worst from being boosted by algorithms, and subject their performance to auditing. Why is false information? I mean, see, again, they say, first of all, what is false information? Who decides that it's false? And then again, why are you removing them? I mean, just again, you decide something is false, and then you're removing it so other people aren't able to hear this and make up their own minds.
But subject their performance to auditing. Well, I wouldn't say it was a forensic audit, but we had Matt Taibbi do a audit of Twitter's behavior. I mean, others wouldn't call it an audit. I'm fine with. Right. Yeah, we know what the auditing does. It's against free speech. Okay, this is all just a cudgel to destroy dissent, to destroy free speech. Russia is the is the cudgel, but and because it's so skimpy, everything, it's really quite monotonous going through this, because
Yes, of course it
there's
is.
nothing to grab onto. Okay,
That's right. There's
but
nothing.
there's one thing that's
Exactly.
clear. One thing is clear: they want to confront and destroy any kind of dissent to officially mandated mandates. Okay, as Russia, COVID,
Yep.
gender ideology,
Right.
we can go on and on.
Right. No, absolutely. And you're absolutely right. What makes this so exhausting reading this is that they never really present examples of somehow a dangerous false information that justifies censorship. Just give me an example. Give me an example of Russian disinformation that you think is Kremlin propaganda and that is dangerous for anyone to listen to. They never do that, because otherwise then they get into the weeds and say, well, I don't know, I mean, you can argue this way, you can argue that way, it's surely up to people to decide who's right in this in the debate. They don't want to do that. In fact, that's why all they do is this vagueness, Kremlin propaganda, disinformation, Kremlin agent, witting, unwitting. You never know who or what are we talking about. And that's how they can get away with this. And it says, separately, European sanctions on Russian state media have prompted YouTube and other platforms to ban the likes of RT, that was once one of the most followed channels. Again, Washington Post, phew, thank God that's gone. So we can't,
Yeah, well, they hate competition, George. They hate competition.
Yeah, exactly. And then this study is the starkest indication yet that the legal and voluntary measures are not getting the job done. Not getting the job done. It's good that the Washington Post wants the job done. Following the warnings from EU Commissioner Thierry Breton that X had work to do to avoid potentially massive fines under the DSA. Fines for what exactly? I mean, again, you're now using coercion against a media outlet because it's offering information that you don't like. So what are they getting fined?
It's not even offering information. It is for acting as a platform.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. That's right.
When George and I talk on the telephone, it is not incumbent upon the service provider to be responsible for anything I say or George says.
Exactly. The research was conducted by nonprofit analysis group Reset, which advocates for greater oversight of digital platforms. And again, Reset,
censorship.
Exactly. Reset, funded by Pierre Omidyar. I have to repeat this again and again. Pierre Omidyar, who pretends that he's some kind of a free speech or an advocate, or he's a media
set up
person.
The Intercept. He set up the Intercept.
He's the publisher of the Intercept. But there is something very, very strange by somebody who purports to be the publisher of a media outlet to advocate greater oversight. In other words, to advocate for censorship. I mean, it really is. I mean, I think like I think Glenn Greenwald, in a different context, had the analogy. It's like going to a cardiologist who recommends that you take up smoking. I mean, it's just bizarre if you're a publisher and you're advocating for censorship. I mean, it makes no sense. And it says, without full access to data held by the companies, data that must be made more available under the new law, Reset relied on public information, such as the number of interactions that problematic content drew from people who had not been following the account that posted it. This is a lot of gobbledygook, because
what is the problematic content?
Exactly. What is problematic content? And again, if somebody has something interesting to say, that's going to generally increase the number of interactions. You know, you have to show me that there's something deeply wrong with a particular tweet or whatever, other than just simply saying, "Oh, it's problematic content, so let's just remove it."
Well, I'm sure there are people on Twitter. The last thing I tweeted on X is that Indiana congresswoman that wants to change the law to allow the U.S. to fund neo-Nazi groups in Ukraine. That is from the U.S. Congress. I'm just reporting what she said.
Right.
I'm sure that's problematic
It's
for
very
these people.
problematic. Yes.
But it's a fact. Okay, she actually is advocating at the same time there are others that are advocating against it.
Yes.
Okay, but the fact that I mentioned it is not. I'm sure it's problematic for these people, but it's not false information.
But that's exactly, absolutely. But again, notice these evasive words, these weasel words like problematic. You read it, and you kind of think, well, I sort of see what it means, as long as I don't think about it. And that's the way these articles kind of go on. They use these circumlocutions. Oh, it's a problematic, which suggests that it needs to be removed, but without actually explaining why should it be removed. So it's problematic.
But okay, let's nominally agree. Okay, it is problematic, but people on Twitter tell you it's problematic, and they attack you, and they wish you death and torture and all of that. That's what these platforms serve to do. You go out there, and you better have a thick skin. I put it out there, and people disagree with me. Fine, okay. I don't know why anyone needs to moderate that.
Right, but that's the thing. What these would-be censors of Twitter are about, they never actually admit that they want to censor content that they disagree with. So instead, they talk about, well, we can't have child pornography, or we can't have harassment. Yeah, exactly. Everyone's going to agree with that. We can't have harassment. We can't have doxing. We can't have threats of violence. Okay, but that's not really what they mean. Everyone knows what they're really talking about here. They're talking about censorship of content.
Those things are not problematic. They're wrong.
They're wrong. And exactly. And that's the point. No one, like when you talk about the First Amendment, no one has ever said the First Amendment protects, threatening somebody with violence, or the First Amendment protects you, when you publish child porn. That's never been. That's not what we're talking about here. But that's why they want to suggest, well, this is what we're talking about. Whereas everyone, no, you are talking about content, largely political content that you don't agree with, but you're hiding behind these things everyone agrees with, like child porn, threats of violence, and so on. Anyway, says here that Reset senior editor Felix Carte told the Washington Post that the myriad propaganda campaigns used hate speech, boosted extremists, and threatened national security, potentially influencing European elections next year. But again, what's always interesting, and I glanced through this report. It's a very tedious report. It's 75 pages. We'll show a little bit after this, but 75 pages. Where's the hate speech? Where are these extremists and whatever? I mean, you kind of, again, they want to say, oh, there's hate speech, oh, there's anti-Semitism, oh, there's racism. It's like, yeah, where is it? Where's your examples of this? Well, you don't have any examples. So the researcher said the law and social media companies were not equipped for a full information war of the type Russia has been waging across state-owned official accounts, aligned accounts, and others. Wow, that's amazing. I mean, you have to admire the Russians. We've got all of this.
George, explain to me, across state-owned official accounts, aligned accounts, and which ones? Because most of them have been banned, okay?
Yep.
I mean,
yeah, that's a very good question. But it's also, the strange thing is that the West, particularly the United States, control the social media space. I mean, all of these companies, they're all American companies. All the social media companies are American. Most of the leading media outlets in the world are if not American, then from NATO countries. New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, United States, ABC, NBC. Then you've got the BBC, and then all the rest, Deutsche Welle. And so, I mean, to compare that with what Russia has, there's,
Okay,
here's yeah, go.
And on top of it, George just very briefly gave a quick checklist of all of these medias that are controlled by NATO countries. I think it's the broadest field that we can put it under. They have control of this media space, and they still can't convince people of their line. I mean, that's what I find amazing.
That's
okay,
right. That's a very good point.
Russia does its best to do its soft power, like China does, or India does, or Saudi Arabia does, North Korea does. Everybody has their soft power. Okay, some are more effective than others, but these people control the media space, and people still don't believe them. That they need to think about that, not about censoring others.
That's a very good point. That's a very, very good point. So this is the report. This is the report by Omedia's group. During the first year of Russia's illegal war in Ukraine, social media companies enabled the Kremlin to run a large-scale disinformation campaign targeting the European Union and its allies, reaching an aggregate audience of at least 165 million and generating at least 16 billion views.
It's amazing, George. The Russia soft power is on par with Tucker Carlson right now. Amazing.
Preliminary analysis suggests that the reach and influence of Kremlin-backed accounts has grown further in the first half of 2023, driven in particular by the dismantling of Twitter's safety standards. Safety. Oh, we have to be safe.
Oh, the mask comes off.
That's right. But again, I'm sort of baffled. I mean, it says targeting the European Union. It's banned. I mean, RT and all the official media outlets are banned in the European Union. So how exactly is the Kremlin doing this? I mean, it's a wondrous performance. Maybe the Western media should take a lesson. You don't have these multi-billion-dollar operations. I mean, the Russians could pull it off without even having any presence. So, hey, why do you need all these billions and billions of dollars?
You need them to keep your cadre. They're shock troops for disinformation and censorship. Shock troops. That's what they are.
That's right. The largest social media platforms made commitments to mitigate the reach and influence of Kremlin-sponsored disinformation. Overall, these efforts were unsuccessful.
What?
Damn, it was unsuccessful. Over the course of 2022, the audience and reach of Kremlin-aligned social media accounts increased substantially all over Europe.
Can you spell VPN? And that is something that you actively do. You must activate a VPN, okay? So that tells you everything. If this, in fact, is true, which I seriously doubt, people are getting access to Russian soft power media outlets through VPNs, okay? But that is a proactive act by the consumer of news.
Right, and you have to pay for it as well.
And you have to pay for it.
All right. That's right. But of course, they're not really talking about Russian media. I mean, they're not talking about RT. I mean, they're just talking about anybody at all in the Western media space who is saying things that they don't think should be said. They shouldn't have a presence on Meta or X. These circumstances raise questions not only about European Union defenses against Russian disinformation warfare, but also about the integrity of the European elections in June 2024. This is a variant of the sort of the NATO line, which is who's going to defend us against the Russians? We just can't do it. We can't defend ourselves against Russian disinformation. We can't defend ourselves against the Red Army which Putin is about to unleash on Europe.
Yeah, but the flip side is that there's no way we can convince people to believe our bullshit. That's
exactly
what they're lamenting.
That's right. Exactly. Exactly. In the meantime, Europe has established new policy and law to address these vulnerabilities, and then blah, blah, the Digital Services Act and so on. This study evaluates how the DSA's rules can be used to guard against the Kremlin's disinformation campaigns and protect the dignity, safety, and free expression of EU citizens. But you're violating the free expression. I mean, it's like, this is what I mean by freedom is slavery. This is pure Orwellianism. We are protecting the free expression of EU citizens by preventing them expressing their freedom. That's how we protect free expression. You cannot be free. You cannot read what you want to read. You cannot watch what you want to watch. And now you are free. So it's absolutely right. You are free because you are coerced. We evaluated Kremlin disinformation campaigns across all major platforms in more than 10 European languages over a period of almost a year. These data sets were then analyzed during the compliance framework, blah, blah. You know, this is the type, this report is full of this kind of gobbledygook, which makes it seem very scientific. Oh, you analyze these articles of DSA, the algorithm. They use a lot that word algorithm. So just to impress you how very scientific it is. It says the conclusions are clear. We find that the Kremlin's ongoing disinformation campaign not only forms an integral part of Russia's military agenda, but also causes risks to public security. See, risks. There's a risk. There's a risk to public security. It's like, this is, I was going, the Committee for Public Safety, Robespierre's committee, we need public safety, fundamental rights and electoral processes inside the European Union. Moreover, we observe that disinformation is only one weapon in the Kremlin's information warfare arsenal. The Kremlin's operations on online platforms often build on other inflammatory or deceptive content and a range of malign behaviors designed to silence opponents and suppress the truth about the war in Ukraine.
Yeah, that's what this is all about, to suppress the truth about the war in Ukraine. Isn't that nice, George? Okay.
But of course, it is exactly as you said, that you're basically, after all your control of the media information space, you still can't win the argument. So the only thing you can do is to scream more censorship, more. It's like the 11 rounds of sanctions. No, it's not enough that we've banned all these Russian media outlets. We've got to eliminate anybody at all who sounds sympathetic to the Russians.
Yeah, eventually it's going to be, they're going to make everybody listen to Burrell on a daily basis. Burrell Chronicle.
That's
brought to you by Mr. Magoo. Okay.
That's right. The most acute form of torture known to man, listening to Borrell 7 hours a day. These risks were mitigated intermittently by the platforms in particular aspects of Russian disinformation about the war, but their efforts did not effectively impede the growth and influence of Kremlin information warfare generally. They talk about this information warfare. I mean, do they have evidence that the Kremlin ever launched this information warfare? Because, as far as I can see, I mean, I don't think Kremlin information warfare has been particularly effective. I don't see it, to be honest. I mean, where is it? But they talk about this massive Kremlin information warfare. But where is this warfare? Effective mitigation was not yet required by law under the DSA during the period of study in 2022. However, most of the platforms were signatories to the Code of Practice as of June 2022.
This kind of reminds me, the poor fellow that wrote this, it's kind of like writing the Central Committee report on the last harvest, okay? I mean, all of these numbers they have to throw in, right. It's so laborious. It's, because it's long and thorough, it must be authoritative. This is exactly the same model,
right.
Okay?
And of course, but all of it is just a repetition. I mean, it's everything is just. I mean, what I've read out, obviously, as I say, it's 75 pages. It's all the same thing. It's just repeating the same thing and without any evidence. I mean, the point is that you'll say, okay, well, give me some examples. If you can give me some examples, then we can discuss,
Okay, like
the validity.
like Israel says, give one false narrative propagated by Russian media and show how it is thoroughly false.
Right.
That's kind of a pedagogical way of doing it. So right. I have limited intelligence. I understand these things. Show and tell. Show and tell.
That's right. That's right. But of course they can't. And instead they say, like as with the white helmets, they say, oh well, this of course is Kremlin disinformation, this is Kremlin propaganda, and so on. Well, hey, there've been a number of studies of the white helmets. Tell me where they're wrong. And then we can talk. Just simply saying, oh, this is the Kremlin. Well, that's not a reputation.
Yeah, but what they do is you say, tell me where it's wrong. No, that's Russian information. No, that's not answering my question. Right. Show me where I'm wrong. No, that's Russian information. That's how it works. That's their dynamic.
Right. Exactly. And then it says, under the code, online platforms committed to a broad set of measures that could have mitigated some of the Kremlin's malign activities. Malign. That doesn't sound like a very scientific report. Malign activities. However, the evidence, so, they use this sort of language and then they put in all this scientific mumbo jumbo to try to impress you, as I say, about these algorithms and, the interactions of these platforms. That all sounds all very impressive. You don't quite know what an interaction is. However, the evidence suggests that online platforms fail to implement these measures at a systemic level. Moreover, the code is not designed to mitigate a full-scale state-sponsored information war propagated by thousands of accounts engaged in coordinated tactics. Is there evidence again that the Kremlin is waging this full-scale state-sponsored information war propagated by thousands of accounts engaged in coordinated tactics? Who are they?
Sure, George,
where are these accounts?
I'm pretty sure I might have bumped up against them if they existed. Okay.
I think so. I mean, it's like, consequently, in many cases, the mitigation measures introduced by online platforms fail to account for the Kremlin's malign intent and full scope of information warfare tactics employed by online platforms. It's just repetition. I mean, you've already made that point.
I need a double espresso, George.
Yeah, I know.
I'm getting a little blurry here.
That's right. We're coming to the end. Don't worry. We're coming to the end. For instance, no platform introduced policies addressing all or even most Kremlin-operated accounts. In addition, platforms fundamentally ignored cross-platform coordinated campaigns.
Okay, Kremlin-operated accounts like former President Dmitry Medvedev's. Are they talking about that? Are they talking about
I guess so.
The Russian Foreign Ministry?
Right. Exactly. But that's the point. When you have something like Medvedev's account, everyone knows that's Medvedev's account. You can like it, you can not like it, but there's no mystery.
I think there's a little Russian flag right next to it.
I mean, exactly. Or Zaharova. I mean, again, you can like Zaharova, not like Zaharova, but there's no mystery who Zaharova is. And then, as a result, the Russian Federation continues to operate vast networks of social media accounts, blah, blah, propagating deceptive. And then we find that the reach of Kremlin-sponsored disinformation has grown since February 2022. In absolute numbers, pro-Kremlin accounts continue to reach the largest audiences on Meta's platform. Notice how
those accounts, George.
Which account? Pro-Kremlin. Notice they slipped from one to another. They're suggesting that the Kremlin was running these accounts. Suddenly now they say it's pro-Kremlin. Well, they can call any account pro-Kremlin, but that doesn't mean it has anything to do with the Kremlin. But they switch from one to another, and it's done in this very quite a sophisticated, deceptive way, because you don't notice how they've actually switched the terminology. Because pro-Kremlin, you can call anyone pro-Kremlin. That's different from saying that it's actually run by the Kremlin. Meanwhile, the audience size for Kremlin-backed accounts, now they've moved from pro-Kremlin, Kremlin-backed. What's a Kremlin-backed account? Are they getting financed by the Kremlin? I mean, what do you mean by backed? more than tripled on Telegram. In addition, we found that no platform consistently applied its terms of service in repeated tests of user notification systems in several Central and Eastern European languages.
Well, why is Telegram just, it's on fire? I mean, it is growing leaps and bounds. Why? Because people are not censored there.
Right. No, that's true. That's true. The rules provided by the DSA hold great potential to rein in Kremlin disinformation. They misspelled rein. And other state-sponsored attacks on the democratic integrity and fundamental rights. But they must be applied quickly and effectively in order to help mitigate these coordinated attacks. And then, and then it goes on, the Kremlin could not censor the free media of other countries or block Facebook across the continent to isolate Europeans from the truth. Instead, the Kremlin and its proxies captured the growing audiences with highly produced propaganda content and steered users to unregulated online spaces where democratic norms have eroded and hate and lies could be spread with impunity.
I don't know where these places are, George.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's highly produced propaganda content and steered users to unregulated online spaces where democratic norms have eroded. What does that mean, again, this democratic norms? It's a little like what we talked about when they talk about the AfD, the Alternative für Deutschland, and they say, we need to ban this party because it doesn't respect democratic norms. We have to outlaw a political party because it doesn't respect democracy. So you don't know, what does it mean democratic norms have eroded? If you're trying to ban any kind of a free speech space, then you're violating democratic norms by definition. This is an old playbook. The Kremlin has attempted to manipulate foreign communication systems and public opinion long before the rise of Facebook and Google. We're going back to the good old Soviet Union and the great days of the KGB and the so-called information warfare doctrine goes back to early Soviet times, Dzerzhinsky. It builds on reflexive control. The idea is to shape how adversaries think about an issue. Is that
like Operation Mockingbird? Yeah,
that's it, exactly. Okay. That's right. And that's a very good point, what you just said, because everything they're saying here, and you don't think that the Western intelligence agencies do that. It's all been recorded, like you're talking about Operation Mockingbird. And then there was that famous essay, though Carl Bernstein probably now disowns it, but he wrote this essay in the 1970s, how the CIA completely infiltrated American journalism. All these magazines and journalists are all working with the CIA. I mean, this all very recorded that how is essentially, the CIA and the Pentagon have been using journalists for decades. They were doing it, the British were doing the same thing. That the Foreign Office, that international department, and they were feeding them information, which journalists go, hey, this is a scoop. I've got this great scoop. The Foreign Office gave you this scoop. Oh, the Russians are doing this, and the Russians are doing that. The Foreign Office was just feeding you this stuff. Soviet goes on. Since the 1950s, the security agents, KGB, hosted a department dedicated to spreading disinformation in other countries, including anti-Semitic, racist narrative designed to deepen socio-political divides. What were these anti-Semitic? This is kind of an interesting one. When were the Russians presenting anti-Semitic?
Well, it's kind of like Martin Luther King. He was an agent of the Kremlin, and he sowed racial discord as if there was no racial discord in America.
No racial discord to speak of. It was
I always find that hilarious.
It was the Soviets who invented.
Okay, or it was Russian propaganda that caused social unrest over COVID. There was plenty of social unrest without Russian interference.
Okay? Exactly. Yeah. That's right. But the irony, of course, is that they kind of invent a Russia that just doesn't even exist. I mean, Russia was not against the lockdowns. It was not against the vaccines. It was all.
I'm a witness. I lived through it.
But they kind of made this up. Oh, the Russians are spreading this anti-lockdown propaganda. However, as this study shows, online platforms have supercharged the Kremlin's ability to wage information war and thereby cause new risks for public safety. This is the risk for public safety, fundamental rights, and civic discourse in the European Union.
As if it doesn't exist organically all by itself.
That's right. But public safety, it's always this you know, that's when it gets menacing. You know, this is a danger to safety. I don't feel safe because there's Kremlin propaganda. This Kremlin propaganda is endangering my health and safety. The effort is not limited to shaping opinion about Russian aggression in Ukraine. It is designed to foment political and social instability among its adversaries by stoking ethnic conflict, promoting isolationism, and distracting public attention away from Ukraine and onto domestic affairs.
I would just say the opposite. That's very interesting, you know, distracting public opinion, public attention away from Ukraine. No, they don't, you know, they don't. What Russia, soft power, does is constantly telling you what's going on in Ukraine and giving an alternative interpretation of it. That's what they don't like, okay? It's not like they don't want it. It's not being talked about. It's being talked about a lot because people are realizing they've been lied to over and over and over again, like weapons of mass destruction.
Well, that's right. And that's when they say promoting isolationism, that's, of course, is a very loaded term because
it always happened. On my program, I've been accused that all
exactly. I mean, it's, you know,
they say, well, you know, this is what they do. They love to do this. Well, no, Peter, it's more complicated than that. And I have the best rejoinder. No, it's wrong. Okay. You know, foreign wars are wrong. Okay.
Right.
And that's not complicated.
Right. Well, that's it. But see, they want us promoting isolation and distracting public attention away from Ukraine and onto domestic affairs. And again, why is that something as bad that countries, democratic countries, want to focus on domestic affairs rather than a war in Ukraine, which doesn't have anything to do with them? I mean, that's again, it kind of goes together with democracy. You know, people are more interested in the affairs of their own countries than in a war, you know, which is, you know, thousands of miles away. But of course, for these people, again, the Omedia's network, this is the most terrible thing you can imagine. Imagine not talking about Ukraine. Imagine not, you know, wanting to give Ukraine even more money and arms and so on. And then he says, and this is very interesting, he says, for example, as recently as April 2023, the Washington Post reported on leaked documents detailing Kremlin's strategy to instigate a new extremist political movement in Germany by tailoring and targeting disinformation campaigns on online platforms.
Now, we did a video on
it. Exactly, you remember that. We did a video on that. And of course, there was no documentary evidence whatsoever about leaked documents. There were no leaked documents. There were nothing to suggest that Kremlin was behind this. And basically, even the whole article was nothing. I mean, there was no evidence even that in Germany there was any kind of a movement for left and right to unite against German involvement in Ukraine. But they've used this as an example. We've got it. You know, here was this Kremlin was behind this this move when there's no evidence at all that the Kremlin was anything. And I think that's it. So that was the latest batch of documents on Russian disinformation. There's going to be more.
George,
yeah.
Well, there's going to definitely be more. And when this conflict comes to an end, it will continue because who were the collaborators? How do we explain how this happened? Okay, it's not going to end. It's not going to end in my lifetime. Okay, they can't let it go because, as George and I said, the most important takeaway from George's amazingly hard work here, his forensic review, but what they have almost absolute control of all of these social media outlets, legacy media, and they still can't convince people of their line, okay? And that's why they're doing this. Now, I believe that Russia, and Trump, there is one commonality. They've been pushing it for years. It's completely fake what they're doing, but these are two of the most important cudgels. This is their moment to to take back control. They don't want competition. They don't want a marketplace of ideas. And Russia is so convenient. I mean, even in the documents that George was citing to us, don't you feel that kind of Soviet tinge to it all? It's all so familiar, isn't it? That's intentional.
That's right. That's right. Exactly. It's all about the enemies. There's a kind of this ubiquitous enemy everywhere. And this enemy is basically aligned with Trump and is aligned with Putin. So that's like, so you can put everyone into the same bucket, you know, all the people that you hate, you put them all together and say, yeah, hey, this is these are all the people that must be eliminated. But here, you know, what they're trying to do is essentially remove all possibility of any kind of discussion of anything, because there's no attempt at reason, there's no attempt at an argument. It's just Putin, you know, Putin propaganda, or, you know, well, Trump, you know, they've got the whole you know, array of insults that they can throw at Trump. So anyone who's saying anything about favorable about Trump, again, you know, you get a brickbat of attack. So it's kind of sinister, really. I mean, this is a real move to eliminate any kind of free speech, and as was shown here, the media are in the forefront. The mainstream media are in the forefront, you know, banging the drum. Yeah, we need, you know, we need more censorship. You know, we need to bring this under control.
Yep. So all of these people, they're doing one thing, George. They're explaining why they're doing it. But the very process of them explaining what they're doing means they're failing. They're losing. That's why they put so much effort into it. Okay. When you're explaining, you're losing. And that's exactly what we see here. And George is absolutely right. This is not going to end anytime soon, because whatever the resolution is in Ukraine, whenever it is, there's going to be how to explain that. And it's going to be, oh, we had a fifth column. Well, we have to go after these people. Okay. They're within our purview. Okay. You know, I feel sorry. I say this when I end my program very often to my guests, is that you people have courage, because they can't hurt me, but they can hurt you. And, you know, and now it's just like, you know, it's such an act of courage to say, no, this is all nonsense. I don't believe a word of it. They've been lying from the very, very beginning. And we have the receipts. We have the receipts because we use their media. Right. Those are the receipts.
Well, that's right. But I think they're going to try and extend the censorship. I mean, remember, I mean, what's already happened with Twitter or X, which is that Musk has gone back on a number of his promises. I mean, not all of them, but he's already started going back because he's under threat. He's under threat. I mean, you know, he wants to make money on Twitter, and therefore he has to worry about advertisers. That's a serious concern. He overpaid for Twitter. He shouldn't have paid that amount, but now he's got a huge debt that he has to deal with. So he's vulnerable to advertisers. He's vulnerable to pressure from governments. I mean, he lives off government contracts. So again, he's changed his tune. You know, he hired this woman as a CEO, and she also talks about safety. You know, creating safe spaces. You know, freedom of speech is not the same as freedom of reach, and so on. So there's going to be more of this. I can quite see that, you know, we're going to go back to the deplatforming era, particularly as the election really gets underway.
Oh, yeah. All right. These people will never give up. They'll never give up. Once you have control, you'll do anything, and I mean anything, to keep it. Okay. Exactly. Because remember, George, they're virtuous. We're not. Okay. Exactly. I truly believe that they are virtuous people. Okay. Right. And the thing, you know, creating social strife and all that. Yeah, because they don't want people to realize that they're being screwed by the people that rule over them. Okay. So it's, you know, that's what divide and conquer, bred in circuses, We have seen it all before. Okay. The difference is here, these people are just grossly stupid and incompetent. Those documents, I mean, I bet they had somewhere Aspen, some like, oh, there's a good report, thorough report. Yeah, we need more money for more reports. Okay.
Right. Exactly. That's what they do.
It's
Yeah.
the censorship industrial complex. It really is. People make money off of it.
That's right. No question. And particularly when they put together all these numbers. I mean, remember all these numbers? Remember when they were claiming that some tweet, this was seen by 2 billion people around the world? Total nonsense. It was the people who were saying this had absolutely no understanding of anything. So, oh, 2 billion people saw this tweet, you know, a pro-Trump tweet or something. No, 2 billion people didn't see it. You know, they were obviously confusing, because a lot of people who write about this don't really understand computers. They don't understand the internet. They don't understand math. So they said, oh yeah, 2 billion people saw this tweet. Wow.
Well, what is it? What is it?
Is really, his reach is so great.
When I go into my Twitter feed and I scroll, if I go over something, that's kind of like there's a certain word for it. Okay. I didn't read it. I didn't touch it. I just scrolled over it.
That's it. Exactly. Then that big
an interaction or something like that.
Yeah, something like that. Exactly. But that's the point. They were just adding all this together, and oh, 2 billion people saw this nonsense. Oh, 2 billion people didn't see this tweet. But that's the point. You know, you frighten people with this kind of nonsense, and they say, you know, Putin's reach is now greater than he's ever been. We've banned him, we've eliminated him, so now he's even worse than ever.
Let me check if I can see his face in the sky. No, not tonight. Not tonight. All right, everybody. This has been one of George's most exhaustive, and I mean
literally exhausting. Yes,
he put some time into it, and that means you should compensate him. Okay. I'm challenged. This is the George challenge, right?
Exactly.
In all seriousness, that's a lot of work. Okay, that's a lot of work. Okay, and he does it all. I didn't do it. George did it. Okay, so all right, everybody. This is Gaggle with Peter and George. We're on Locals. Buddy knows we're ready. Come on. We're on Locals. This is Sunday. Our wrap, our mega wrap. I think this is like, Jerry Lewis telethon tonight. But we'll be back on Monday, and George will have his first live stream on Tuesday. Week coming up.
Exactly. 3 p.m. Eastern time. Please join me. Come with comments, criticisms, and suggestions. And while the weather is still quite warm, you can go out for a cold one afterwards. But on the way out the door, think about little Buddy, because Buddy is now saying, hey, I did the work. No, it wasn't him. I did it. I went through all these articles.
He was the
I'm the one that needs to be compensated.
He was the inspiration as well.
Give me the money. Give me the reward. So, I think I'll give it to Buddy. Tip jar. If you got anything in your pocket, whip him out. Dunk him in his tip jar. He needs to be compensated. We're very grateful for all of your help and friendship and support. The more you're able to donate, the more of these videos we can make, the more we can improve the technology. And above all, Buddy can be compensated. So remember, if you like the Gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. See you soon. Bye.